Thank you very much for having invited me. I say this at the beginning because I'm sure that at the end you will regret of having invited me. The presentation will try to be relatively short, 1 hour. I hope I succeed. But it covers a lot of ground. Because I'm trying to give an idea of what was Marx's critique of political economy. And as Marx says, I think in the introduction to the French edition, there is no royal road to science. So one has to work a lot to go into this kind of argument. Das Kapital is a book that is started to write, let us say, in the 50s or of the 19th century, as a subtitle, A Critique of Political Economy. This, of course, creates two questions. What does mean critique, and of what we are talking about? Marx thinks that you can apprehend reality, the real object, making it first of all as an object of knowledge. His critique of political economy mainly refer to Riccardo, Smith, etc., is a critique of categories, but through the critique of categories is a critique of reality. I think that behind there is a peculiar theory of knowledge which mixed theory and practice, or as a contemporary philosopher of science would say, knowing and intervening. How a book like Capital should be read? First of all, one has to interpret what Marx wrote and what he was trying to say. But very soon one realized that one has to problematize his writings. They are not always coherent, or there are hidden problems. And this is a personal position. In the end, one has to engage in something more than interpretation, a reconstruction of the Marxian critique of political economy. A great problem is that Marx has been lost in translation. He wrote in German with a peculiar terminology which may be lost to contemporary readers, and maybe also not so contemporary readers. So there is a problem of language and the problem of theoretical categories. I probably will deal mostly with the first, then the second, at least openly, because of the time constraint. The question that Marx deals with in Das Kapital is double: how capital produce and how capital is produced. In how capital is produced, we have the reference to what means a critique of political economy. I'll go back on this later on. But my interpretation is that the critique of political economy cannot but be the production of a different so-called science in the German sense. So a critical political economy. Marx is, in my view, opposed to past and present economics and to past and present political economy. Economics, say neoclassical theory, it is the criticism of vulgar economy. They stay on the superficial level of reality, and often they are apologetic. Political economy, I said, were the classicals, but there is a resurgence, or there has been a resurgence of the classical thinking. In Marx's view, they were looking for the inner connection, so there is a scientific element in political economy. But nevertheless, Marx provides a critique of political economy. So, to be as usual very nice, I think that you name your series Critical Economics. From my point of view, I can't understand what that means. Of course, there is a problem what all this means today. What does a critique of political economy today means? What is political economy today? How to relate theoretical critique and practical struggles. First of all, a general outlook of what I would like to do. Capital is not a thing, it is a social relation. It is not means of production, it is not money and all that. The core of capital for Marx was exploitation in production. But this happens in an essentially monetary economy where every exchange is mediated by money, there is no monetary exchange, and products are commodities sold on the final market. In fact, if you read the first book of Capital, when you arrive more or less at the end, you realize that the only external buying for the capitalist class is the one this class has to do for getting labor power from the working class. So at the end of Das Kapital 101, not at the beginning, you realize that the book is in a macro-social dimension. Today we would say, though it was not the terminology of Marx, it is a macro-economic foundation of the economic discourse. The wage bill is anticipated in money as finance. We will come back to this. This social relation, this capital, is analyzed by Marx as having a systematic inner tendency to accumulation and crisis. Accumulation is out of equilibrium, no balanced growth, nothing like that. And crisis is recurrent. Recurrent and dramatic, but is also the recreation of the system. What is the labor theory of value? Is all this at once? Theory of exploitation, theory of a monetary economy, macro social theory, theory of accumulation, theory of crisis. Yes, it is also a theory of individual pricing, but very, very deliberately. You have seen that my title is a little different, value theory of labor, but we will understand why I propose this provocative change later on. Marx started from the commodity, the ware. A commodity seems at first sight an extremely obvious trivial thing. It is a very strange thing abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. John Robinson or Gunnar Myrdal criticized Marx's value theory because value was metaphysical. Well, Marx said this at the beginning of Capital, so he agrees completely. So be prepared to a lot of theology and mystical things in the following. The first phrase says, wealth in societies where capitalist mode of production reigns appears as an immense heap of commodities. This is the beginning. You will see that I will be very slow at the beginning and I will be very quick at the end because I want to cover this ground, but I think that it is important if we want to deal with the real thing, with the real Marx, to go into his argument. You will see a lot of German terms in parentheses. The reason will appear later. You have to excuse me because I don't really know German. I have to know at least the German of Marx and to understand him. And I think that the problem is exactly this. Every translation is not perfect. The Italian, there are some which are better than others. None is perfect. The worst translation in the world are those in English. So beware. Help yourself, but you will not understand Marx going to those translations. The first line means that Marx is talking of capitalism in the first chapters. But capitalism disappears for the first 3 chapters. Reappears only in English in the 6th chapter, in Italian in the 4th chapter. It is an immense heap of commodities. What is a commodity? A commodity is a dual entity, use value, exchange value. Use value means a product with some utility, exchange value means a quantitative ratio of one use value with other use value. This is the first definition. From this definition, Marx says it seems, it is a sham, it is an illusion, that the notion of an intrinsic value is contradictory. It is not so, and we will see why. First, we have to understand that behind the exchange value, we must detect value, a kind of general property of exchangeability, of social exchangeability. And we have to understand from where it comes. So actually, the fundamental duality is not use value versus exchange value, but it is use value and distinct value. The commodity has been produced by labor, and the labor is dual, exactly like the commodity. So let us give a look at labor. It is a very complex category, it's not very simple. Marxists usually use labor meaning very different things. Labor power, Arbeitskraft in German, the notion was capacity to work, Arbeitsvermögen in the earlier writings, is capacity to work. It is the physical and mental abilities to work which is attached to human beings. Marx speaks of human labor power. What is its use? Of course, its use of capacity to work is to work. It is living labor. Living labor is a fluid, is an activity. This activity is at the same time, because of what I said before, concrete and abstract. Concrete labor is labor that produces the commodity as use value. Abstract labor is labor as long as it produces value, which has to become money, we will see. It's a labor which it has yet to prove its sociality. It's part of social labor in a very general sense, the total social labor. But in the activity, in the production process, this activity has yet to prove to satisfy needs. Beware, use values and concrete labors are non-additive, they cannot be added, they are non-homogeneous, they are incommensurable for Marx. And Marx defines value as a gelatin. It is translated as congelation. It does not give the idea. Gelatin, galerte, of labor pure and simple, is, well, it was a commodity at the time. It was a semi-solid mass from cooling a concentrated glue solution from animal substance, gelatina. Something which is not really very nice. And Marx wanted to disgust the reader. A gelatin, not really solidified, which is homogeneous and commensurable. So the product is objectified labor, dead, which has to be related back to living labor as a fluid. As I said, Marx has lost its relation. I give only some of the terms I use and their meaning, and some more. When Marx use shine, or the verb shinen, he refers to an analysis of surface phenomena considered in themselves as the essence. It is, in English, to seem. It is a semblance. It points to an illusion, a necessary illusion, but it is an illusion. Erscheinung, or the verb erscheinen, they are the same phenomena at the superficial level, appearing as the necessary phenomenological manifestation of the essence. In English, appears is used both for shine and erscheinung. So that's a great problem. These forms at the superficial level, yes, they show in some way the essence in one form or the other, but they are, says Marx, verrückte Formen. These forms are displaced, deranged. When you say deranged, means crazy, perverted. So the reality itself looks strange, metaphysical. Darstellung is the processual exhibition, presentation, or exposition of the whole. It is designed to show you how all this goes on. This is the logical interpretation, which is true. I think there is also in Marx an ontological dimension, and we will go back to this ontological dimension later. This is very often translated not as exposition, exhibition, presentation, but as representation. But that's a problem. Marx uses for representation Vorstellung, which is the mental notional representation, the anticipation from the point of view of the subjects. Represent is very often used for the verb repräsentieren, but this has to do with the official representation of somebody else, like a general may be called a representative of something. In Italy it would be better the prefetto, but I don't know in English how it would be translated, who represents the state in a town. I add something more, however. Ausdrucken. Ausdrucken means to express. But I give a strong meaning to express as a movement from inner to the outer. The basis of most of these categories was Hegel's science of logic. So we started from the duality of the commodity and arrived to value. Then Marx says the objectivity of the commodity as value differs in the respect from them quickly. I think it is from Falstaff, something like that, the Shakespeare comedy, that a man does not know how to have it. There is some kind of sexual joke behind this, I think. The point is that you look at a commodity, yes, there is value inside, but where it is, how you handle it. So, at first, at the beginning, there is value, but it is a ghost, literally speaking. The question is, can this ghost gain material existence before final exchange of the commodity market? You read paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, you seem to have an answer. Yes. The material existence is the physiological, historical definition of labor. The energetic expenditure of human organs. In paragraph 3, things are changing. You see a doubling in reality of the conceptual duality within the commodity. The conceptual duality within the commodity was use value and value. The doubling is the duality between commodity and money. When you have this external duality, the inner duality of the commodity becomes an external duality, value actually exists. Not only latently, but actually exists. This summarizes, of course, a lot of argument in Marx that can stay there. This argument is the argument in Marx about the dialectics of the forms of value, and it is where Marx reconstructs the constellation in which the values, the plural is important, of all commodities, not the single commodity, but all commodities, are exhibited by only one unique excluded commodity, which performs the role of universal equivalent. Marx explained that it will be the metals, then gold. There is a kind of evolution, yes, but there is also the intervention of politically of the state to fix this external one commodity universal equivalent as money. So this argument has not really much to do with the argument of Menger on the origin of money. And this special commodity is like the, as we will see, the incarnation of value. It is as if besides lions, tigers, hares, and all other real animals, also the animal existed, the individual incarnation of the whole animal kingdom. It is here that Marx, about the commodity, speaks of value embodied. Beware, in the translation by Cantimori in Italian, value embodied became labor embodied, which is quite different. Money as a commodity, which is gold, is produced by labor. Gold. Money is gold, gold is not money. It means that in capitalism money is gold, but not because gold as a natural entity, as the natural property of being money. When we are here, at the point of the argument where we have money as a commodity, the ghost has taken possession of a body. It is an embodiment, like in a Mary Shelley, not Mary Shelley, in a Gothic novel. Money then is literally value embodied in the use value of gold. The value in the commodity went out of the body of the commodity and took possession of the body of the commodity gold. Beware, the term used everywhere, labor embodied, lavoro incorporato, in Marx exists, but only relative to concrete labors. They are embodied. Abstract labor is not embodied. Abstract labor is contained. Marx also used the term and correlative steckenden, which means it is something which is stuck into and hidden within the commodity, so that you don't see it. When commodities are eventually exchanged against money, the universal equivalent, then their abstract labor, the abstract labor of the commodities, is exhibited in the concrete labor embodied in gold. But, well, the notion of exchange value changes with a second notion of exchange value. Now, exchange value means the amount of each commodity exchanged for some amount of money, here gold. So we are getting here to the notion of price. Money as a universal equivalent in the final exchange of commodities validates ex post, it is an ex post eventual validation, commodities in exchange. And it is there that abstract labor is eventually completed. So, Warenaustausch, commodity exchange, is always monetary. Marx is a critique of pre-monetary or non-monetary theories of value. In fact, it is the only monetary theory, labor theory of value. Now we arrive to a second definition of abstract labor, beyond the physiological one. Abstract labor now appears as the immediately private labor, the labors in production which are only mediately social through the mediation of the exchange of commodities in exchange. So there is an ambiguity in this abstract labor. It is the abstract labor, meaning the labor which has yet to prove its sociality, but then it is in the becoming of gain this sociality. Money is the individual incarnation of value. I don't want to go into the details of that. But here the reference is explicitly to Christianism. Labor producing gold, look, it's unique. It is the only private labor that counts as immediately social labor of the market, not the others. Only the labor producing commodities. In the exchange, which is always monetary, on the final market, it is exhibited in equivalence. It is an equivalence, it's not an equation. Marx says, we know that there are expressions of labor between the labors on one side, which tentatively produce commodities. I say it's tentatively because if you have thought you produce a commodity and do not sell it, you have produced nothing, versus the labor producing money as a commodity, the unique social, immediate social labor. Beware, there is a consequence from this. You can never calculate directly, measure directly value in labor hours. Exhibition of essence is never directly in labor hours, but only through money. Let me go back to this notion of labor, Arbeit. I go very quickly because more or less we said this. There is of course a social labor. It is the total labor spent in society as a whole. It is what called in German is Gesamtarbeit. Total labor also if you wish. There is unmittelbar Privatarbeit. The private labor on account of the private individuals in the production processes. They are mediately social labor, vermitterte gesellschaftliche Arbeit. Excuse me my pronunciation, those who are German, we should know that it is horrible. There is the unmittelbar gesellschaftliche Arbeit, immediately social labor, which refers only to money. So when you look at the translation, go and look at the German, you find with this. And there is something that I didn't said before, and it is this one. Unmittelbar vergesellschaftete Arbeit. It is directly associated labor. You may also say socialized labor, not social. Socialized labor, which is the labor in common, which is social in the same act of labor influx. Before capitalism, in the household, even capitalism maybe in the household, after capitalism in a planning society, etc. So we start to realize that we are talking not of labor in general, but of a specifically historical kind of labor. This is why I say value theory of labor. Value because it looks at labor from a certain perspective. Values are monetary amounts when they are realized, and only then they can be translated into labor magnitudes through the notion of the monetary expression of labor time. In English you find a lot this acronym MELT. It is how much money value is exhibited in 1 unit of labor time, if you wish, the value productivity of labor. It is the inverse of the value of money. Of course, Marx, with the money as a commodity theory, defined that in terms of hours, but you can say that the value of money is how much labor time is exhibited by one unit of money, for example, gold. The problem is how it is determined in Marx, in the first 3 chapters. It is determined at the opening of the circuit, where there is the inflow of gold through barter. That's very strange. No? We have a strong monetary theory of value in which the value of money is defined in terms of barter. In the aggregate, it is not so. This is the nominal production. Why is real production? PD prices is equal to the labor hours, say, for the monetary expression of labor time. You can cancel this. Otherwise, you have money here and hours here. So you have the commensurability. I knew that. How is measured error? In socially necessary labor time. What does it mean, socially necessary labor time? It means 2 things. The first is very well known. The second is usually sidestepped. It is a technical average. It seems very clear, no? We will see that it is not so. And second, the labor, which must be social, meaning social because it answers social need. So if I am a very inefficient worker and I spend more hours, that doesn't mean that I produce more value. No? But if I don't answer the social need, again, it is not socially necessary labor. I was on the train, I had not the possibility to go online, so this slide is the only one in Italian. And here there is a thing. Until now it seems that all comes to labor retroactively from money exchange. But Marx says, look, commodities do not become commensurable through money. They are already commensurable as commodities, in and for themselves. Commensurability go from the inner to the outer. It is an expression, as I said. The verb ausdrücken. And how is that possible? In Marx, the argument is this: commodities are already commensurable before final exchange because they are products, but on these products as commodities there are attached price tags. So they are ideal money amounts. This price tax goes from a representation, meaning notional anticipation, through forcellum. Let us leave aside this. In my argument, or my way of looking at the Marx argument, there is a connection, necessary connection between value and labor, which goes necessarily through money. And money is a commodity for the time being. So if we cut money, the connection is not there. But this connection is such that value for exchange is already an ideal money amount with a given notional labor content. And if values are realized, this notional becomes real. When in circulation, when value is actualized, when value substance, various content is actualized, so that ideal money becomes real money, and you have value after exchange. When you are in the argument about money, I don't go into this. This is more or less chapter 3. I just say that in chapter 3, when Marx speaks of money, he says that money is first of all universal variable measure of value. There is no search for an invariable measure of value in Marx. And it cannot be. Then it is also a means of circulation. For example, in simple commodity circulation, commodities sold against money so that the money can be used to buy other commodities. Money can be a means of payment to finally close at the clearinghouse positive or negative balances for bilateral credits. I don't go into details. I just want to say that more and more in this argument, money as a commodity disappears from circulation. At the universal measure of value, it needs only to be ideally present. in means of circulation, it must be present, but it can be substituted through a representative. And the representative, what Marx calls money as Geld, can be substituted to something which are, say, currency, coins, etc. And at first they are of the same weight and same denomination. But then there is a divorce. In the end, when money must be there as a commodity, as world money. Before asking why, let us go back. There is a point in Marx's argument in which Marx speaks of money as money, in which one wants money as the universal incarnation of wealth. He calls this a chrysalis, which is fixed in ores, the beginning of thesaurization. This is what happens with world money. When in the world exchange you want the immediately social form of manifestation of abstract labor, this is Marx, you want gold, to have it there. When does this happen? In the crisis. So it's a bit strange, you know. You have a money as a commodity theory, in which money as a commodity is essential, but in the end it's never there, if not in the crisis. This, of course, shows that Marx could not have been a believer in Say's law. I think that some of you may be have been at the presentation of Joseph Halevi. This is a discussion we have since a long time, and he thinks that Marx believed in Say's law, at least chapter 23. Not at all, in my view. So, where we are. The cost of value took possession of a body, and the body is the body of money, and money is a chrysalis. I think you know what is a chrysalis. A chrysalis must turn into a butterfly. And what is the butterfly? It is money producing money, or more money. It is money as capital. And what is capital? It's exactly self-valorizing value. Marx defines this as a totalitarian subject positing its own presupposition. He moves from the simple commodity circulation to capitalist circulation. Money creating more money through commodity. Well, here you are in a world in which, if you look closely, Hegel's ontological categories start to gain actuality. That's why I said that there is not only a logical but also an ontological circularity in Marx. Value begetting value becomes the instantiation of Geist. The idea, or better, Geist. This idealistic butterfly, which starts from value, and Marx says about value, there is no one atom of matter in it, must be grounded somewhere. And in where it is grounded? Well, it is grounded in the immateriality of capital as a vampire. So we started from the ghost and ended with the vampire. Thanks to a peculiar interpretation of Hegel. The philosopher may say that it is not the true Hegel. Maybe. My idea is that it is Hegel's Marx. It was a good thing for Marx, because for Marx this Hegel represented what was actually capital. Oh, you will have to look at this quote, but it's a wonderful quote from chapter 4, in which all this comes out, and capital is defined as an automatic subject, an overreaching and overriding subject. This should be with a capital S. That's stupid, because in German every noun is in capital. But here the point is that I think that Marx thought it was a big subject. Big subject. Well, when we look at this capital reality, we have a reality in which there are formally free and equal human beings. They are the living bearers of labor power. In German, lebendige, living, Arbeitskraft is labor power. Labor power is a commodity sold on the labor market. I should put the commas, inverted commas in commodity, but that's for another time. There must be a finance to production, because I think that in Marx's argument, even in the Marx commodity argument, but also out of it, you need an ante-validation of labor power as expected, leaving labor as abstract labor. This happens at the opening of the capitalist circuit. At this point, labor power has been bought by the capitalists, which use this labor power, so they take the living labor. And that's right. You know, labor power and living labor are really of capital. Capital has bought them, so it has the right to use it. At the same time, you understand underneath that there is a problem, because labor power cannot be attached to workers as human. It is their labor power too, and it is they who work. So living labor still cannot but be their work. This is the basis of what we could call a quasi-contradiction, a near-contradiction. I don't want to go here now in my talk into this thing, but I think it would be important too. Capital by workers individually, Marx says, but it has to put them in social relation in factories. This is the ground of resistance, conflict, potential antagonism, what some authors calls a counter-productivity of labor. And capital has to react to this. And how it reacts? It reacts organizing the labor and changing the techniques in the labor process so that labor is controlled and normalized. So there is a third definition of abstract labor. Yes, in the factories there are the immediately private laborers that still have to show their sociality on the market. But within the factory, labor is socialized. Do you remember? Vergestelte Arbeit. Socialized in the factory. So you have this very strange situation in which you have the immediately private laborers, which are the capitalist firms in competition. They are not individual producers. Now we know that they are the capitalist firms in competition. And they need the anti-validation from the monetary capitalist, but have to pre-commensurate labor in production, making it labor fitting to be abstract labor. It is what Marx calls practical abstraction and things like that. From here, Marx starts the discussion about exploitation, because wage workers must be included into their capital as an internal living other. So exploitation here means a very simple thing. Capital has everything except labor power, and when it has labor power, it must use labor power, so it must extract living labor. So exploitation means the use of labor power, the entire working day, defined in its quality and quantity. The point is that you can't have labor without pumping it out from labor power, without consuming the body of the workers themselves. It's not me. They are exactly the words by Marx. So you have on one side the circularity of this kind of Geist, which is capital positing its own presupposition, capital creating capital. But on the other side, you understand that the occult secret of the circularity of capital is a linear process of sucking living labor. It's exactly sucking, like in a vampire story. It's just that usually it is translated as absorption. But if you look at the German, it is sucking living labor in excess of the necessary labor needed to reproduce workers. It is linear, from labor, in all the complexity of the notion, to capital. So you understand that labor depends on capital, but at the same time, capital has a zombie life, because it is a dead undead, if it sucks living labor, and it is dependent, this zombie, on a social condition of possibility. Capital must win the class struggle in production as contested terrain. So before we have embodiment as taking possession of a body. Now we have, and it is a different German term, embodiment, meaning to put the workers within the body of capital. So now the point is that Capital is Frankenstein and Dracula. Dracula was written after Capital, but Marx read Frankenstein. Franco Moretti was from here, Pisa, I don't know. He did a wonderful book, it is a literary critic, a wonderful book translated in English, Dialectics of Fear. It is an essay in one of his books. This is filled not only of Gothic but also of Christian metaphors, and they are internal to the scientific discourse. It is things as they are. The ghost, the chrysalis, the butterfly, the vampire. This is a quote, very famous for chapter 7, in which we see the factory as Frankenstein, as an animated monster. Here there is an error of translation, which I saw in every language. So I go to look at the German, and the German does not say incorporating living labor, but incorporating living labor power, the workers. And then the animated monster begins to work as if its body were by love possessed. For years, I thought it was a very poetic idea. It was not, because it is taken from Goethe, and this is working as if its body was by love possessed. It is a mouse, topo, poisoned, and then it starts to move frantically. Well, now I'm starting to go very, very quick. Marx explains the origin of surplus value through a method of comparison. It starts from givens, methods of production, labor intensity, productive power of labor, employment, the real wage. The only thing that can change is the length of the working day. So, if living labor is equal, the exchange value of labor power is the value of labor power, and for Marx the value of labor power is regulated by the socially necessary labor time needed to produce wage goods, and he calls it necessary labor. Then Marx says, oh well, if living labor is equal to necessary labor, no profits, then prices proportional to labor contained, what now are called simple prices, what were called values. It is Schumpeter's situation of circular flow. But if living labor, as you may expect, is higher than necessary labor, and you maintain, as Marx did, the same price rule, price equal values if you wish, then you explain the origin of surplus value and say, I will explain the distribution later on. So surplus value comes from the lengthening of living labor over and above necessary labor. You can't explain surplus value in a situation in which inputs and outputs are given, as in the neo-Ricardian. This labor is forced labor of formally free subject, and this argument gives the constitution of capital as this automatic subject, which is a fetish. From where it comes? From a human reality. This is the human reality. I skip this. I would like to skip this, but I can't. At the end of the first chapter, there's something that I postponed. It is the final section, final paragraph of chapter 1. Usually it is said to be about fetishism, but the title is different. It is the fetish character. Fetish character and fetishism are not the same. Fetish character is the thing-like nature of capitalist social reality, like a fetish. And this expresses things as they are. It is an Erscheinung. These really are the social relations in capitalism. But you may think that the social properties belong to the things, not in the social conditions, but as natural features of them. These would be fetishes. I gave you an example before. Gold. Gold is, money is gold, but gold is not money. This is what Marx says in the contribution to the critique of political economy. the argument about the constitution that I gave, in my view, it is the true ultimate foundation of the labor theory of value. Capital as one social property to get living labor from workers, human wage earners, the bidders of living labor power. And so you may trace, but it will be a longer argument, the new value added by the workers to the living labor spent by workers. The new value added is actually, if all labor would be productive, monetary income. Living labor for the melt is what lies behind the new value added. Whatever the pricing rule for new value added. Then there is the argument about the relative surplus value. I think you know something about that. The idea is that now the length of the working day is given, and we allow either for a change in labor's productive power or for a change of the labor intensity, something which is often forgotten. In both cases, surplus value augments. If there is a change in labor's productive power, the commodities unit value falls. If there is a higher intensity than the average of labor, value produced in unit of time rises. No, this is wrong, false. Value produced in unit of time rises. Okay. Use value produced in unit of time rises. That's wrong, we have to correct it. So in both cases, you need less hours to produce the given real wage, and so you have a rise in surplus labor and surplus value. The means to produce the relative surplus value are the changes in the capitalist labor process to cooperation, manufacturing division of labor, machines. A capitalist mode of production which makes labor already abstract in production. So the abstraction of labor does not refer to a mental generalization, but to a real abstraction. This real abstraction, in my view, it is related to real subsumption. In a sense, capital formally subsumes labor through the buying of labor power. Paying the wages, they are subsumed under the form of wage. Then, in production, they are subsumed in the way they work. At this point, with machine production, more or less, Marx says that living labor now not only counts as abstract in exchange, but it is already abstract in production. Abstract does not mean the skilling, the concretization, or all that. Abstract means that the qualitative properties to labor are given by the structure of production. If it's very often the case, and the skilled labor is easier to control, then there will be the skilling. But if the conditions are that you need higher skilled labor, but you can control it in other way, this is anyhow confirmed. This I have to skip. This gives the different formulas of capital. This gives the movement of capital from the point of money and not from the point of labor. From the point of labor, I defined a kind of labor in motion, abstraction in motion, starting from labor power as the potential living labor as abstract labor at the beginning of the circuit. Then I have living labor, which is organized by capital, then, but yet has to be socialized, it's a latent socialization, it has to be socialized in exchange when abstract labor is exchanged with money. Well, you have the same circularity in money in motion. If you locate yourself in the second or third book, you can say that industrial capitalism needs prior finance from monetary capitalism. Why? To buy labor power on the labor market. But this depends on the expectations, so there are a lot of uncertainties here. Expectations of banks, expectations of firms. Then the industrial capitalists put workers to work in production. They have given expectations or certain expectations on exploitation. They can be confirmed or disconfirmed. So again, uncertainties. They produce something. This is a money output at expected prices. And of course, the point is the expectations to sell will be confirmed or not. So you have three problematic points. One about finance, and the second about use of workers, the third about selling commodities. And this state has a key role in intervening in all these moments. Through effective demand policies, through the central bank or the control of the banks, etc., or even through labor power, the formation of labor power, a lot of things. Oh, this is a synthetic view of all this. There is an error in German. This is materiator, and this is immediately private, immediately social. But that's a kind of exercise. Look if there are errors and tell me so that I correct it. Very quick. All this needs a theory of the wage. Because what we had until now was, let us look from the point of view of the system. From the point of view of the system, you have capital versus labors. What matters from them? The living labor I can extract from workers as capital, and me as a worker may have an antagonistic interest. But then there is the point that workers are humans. They need to be reproduced. So part of the production must go to them. So part of the production will be produced by necessary labor. I am one who still thinks that necessary labor is defined by Marx in terms of the labor needed to produce some wage goods. That is, I take the real wage as given for the working class. Most of contemporary Marxism, because it makes things so much easier, define necessary labor as the labor commanded by the money wage, individually speaking. So at this point you have a kind of macro feature in which there is an income less the wage. Behind the income you have living labor. Behind the wage you have necessary labor. Of course, capital is interested on how much necessary labor there is. Workers, I think, are more interested in use values, but that's related to. Then there is all the part in Marx about competition. There are two definitions about competition. I take that you know the rate of surplus value, what it is. Surplus value over variable capital, which express in value the ratio, this will be surplus labor, plus valore, on necessary labor, and this is the rate of surplus value. This is the rate of profits, surplus value over total capital advanced, constant and variable. Now, Marx takes, this may be contested, but I take it as good, that the rate of surplus value is equal among sectors. There is the same working day everywhere and the same real wage everywhere. Marx has the classical Riccardian view of competition, tendency to equality among sectors of the rate of profits. But at the same time, and it is interesting in the first book, when he says I should not talk about competition, he has a different notion, which here I don't know why it does not appear. And the different notion is that within the sector there may be innovators. Innovators produce at a value, individual value, which is below the social value dominant in the sector, so they gain an extra surplus value. In this way, there is a differentiation of the rate of profits and a tendency to the differentiation of the rate of profit within the sector. So, the first competition, it is the Riccardian competition, it is the neoclassical competition. The second competition is Schumpeterian competition. Of course, Schumpeter was not there, but Schumpeter knew he was taking his notion of competition from Marx. Go and look at the introduction by Schumpeter, translated in Italian and now also in English, and the Japanese translation of the theory of economic development. Then we have the analysis of accumulation, industrial reserve army, and the tendency of the rate of profits. The analysis of accumulation goes this way. If the capital composition, that's why there was there, if the capital composition is given, what does it mean, capital composition? There is a technical definition, the physical ratio means of production and workers. But of course, it cannot be used to analyze reality because these are non-homogeneous. So you have to evaluate the capital composition in value. The value of cost and capital over the value of variable capital, or even better, the value of cost and capital over variable capital plus surplus value. Marx uses the organic composition of capital. But the organic composition of capital is the value composition of capital as long as it reflects the technical composition of capital. So, if you have an innovation and prices goes down of capital, the organic composition of capital goes up. The value composition of capital goes down. What matters for the rate of profit? The value composition of capital, not the organic composition of capital. When Marx analyzes accumulation, if K is given, the accumulation push up the demand for labor, then wages rises and the surplus value falls. You may have the origin of a profit squeeze analysis. That's a profit squeeze, investment falls, the industrial reserve army goes up. Contrary to my friend Joseph Halevi, by the way, this is an aside, I think the chapter on accumulation, the part of the production, is not about the cycle, as most Marxists. It's just answering this question. What is the law of population in capitalism, if it is not Malthus' law of population? Here I just assume, for the sake of the argument, that all surplus value is invested. The reaction may be labor-saving technical chain. So K rises, also here you have that the industrial reserve army goes up. You may use this formula for the tendency of the rate of profits to fall as a law, a thing that you find in the third book of Capital. That is, if C, the composition of capital, goes up, R goes down. But what about the counter tendencies? If I have new machines, I will have higher surplus value. So you may say, this is not a law, it depends on what happens. Marx had an answer. The answer was, let us imagine that the wage is zero, so you have a maximum rate of profit, which is all the living labor in money forms, or all cost and capital in value price. So what he meant to say is, this, for a given population, even if they work 24 hours, gives a maximum to the numerator. But the denominator can go on and on and on with accumulation. But again, it depends on the relative ratio of prices, I'm near the end, of prices of means of production relative to the price of income. You know, there may be a situation in which innovation is such that the cost on capital goes down, so the argument for me is not convincing. But there is a thing that which need not to be lost. Marx has an idea of what is the basic contradiction of capitalism. A contradiction which goes back to the value-use-value opposition, contradiction. Instead of value, you arrive at capital and use value for capital. It is labor through labor power. All the process of capillary development is such that there is a tendency to have more labor from less workers. But when the less, for a given capital, when capital goes up, this may not be a problem, but there may be a situation in which, if you have less workers, you don't have anymore the subjects of the exploitation, even though each subject may be more exploited than before. The point is that Marx did not end his book. He published the first, but not the second and the third volume of Capital. But even the first is incomplete, because actually he revised. So I have to close in 2-3 minutes, being already a couple of minutes more. So I just say very quickly just a couple of things. If you go in Capital Volume 2, but also in part of Capital Volume 3, you have the argument about the realization crisis. Interestingly enough, in Volume 3, the argument about the realization crisis is within the argument of the falling rate of profit tendency. Very often it is said that the argument about the realization crisis is found in the schemes of reproduction volume 2, which is a great tool. But again, that was not the problem. The problem with which Marx dealt was to answer Malthus and Sismondi on one side and Riccardo and Say on the other. The point was, there were those who said equilibrium is guaranteed, and there were those who said capital development is impossible. Marx, with the schemes of reproduction, showed that each element in the schemes of reproduction is both an element of supply and demand. So in the end, capital provides demand to itself. But it is not a condition of capital to provide that demand in a balanced way. But this just says that crisis is possible. At the same time, this may be developed in a crisis theory. In my view, the most convincing way was the Luxemburg-Kalinski way. And it was not an under-consumptionist way. Most of the Italian left economists, either Marxists or post-Keynesians, are under-consumptionists. That was not the argument of Kalinski. That was not the argument of Rosa Luxemburg. The point was under-investment, not under-consumption. But this should be, of course, more developed. My idea, you find it in a paper, is that if we want to talk about Marx and the crisis, we can just jettison the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. But we have to interpret it in a different way, as a meta-theory of the crisis. To go against the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, you need to increase rate of surplus value. But if you increase the rate of surplus value, you go towards the crisis of realization. If you start from here, you can have a kind of secular historical analysis of the great crisis of capitalism since the end of the 19th century. The long depression of the late 19th century, after Marx's Capital, actually can be explained through the traditional tendential fall in the rate of profits, organic composition of capital going up. Capital reacted not only through the devalorization of capital, but also through things like Fordism, Taylorism, and all that. This pushed up the rate of surplus value, which created the background of the realization crisis. The answers were various: Nazism, New Deal, World War II, then realized Keynesianism. What happened after, in the period 45-70, was that the system was going on needing an increase in the rate of surplus value of the productive workers to succeed in bearing unproductive unproductive expenditures. A lot of Keynesian economic policy was praising production, but not capitalist production. Indirectly it created demand, but that was not the production of capital. This could work, except that there were a series of contradictions from the mid-60s to the mid-70s. Among these contradictions, I think that the key one was the antagonism in labor process, and partially in distribution, but especially in the labor process. So I call the great stagflation is a social crisis, a third kind of crisis, based on the fact that worker in that technological and organizational setting was able to constrain the needed rise in the rate of surplus value, and in some countries even to invert the fall of the relative wage, as Luxembourg would have said, the rise in the relative surplus value. Then I should explain what happened after, but I have not the time, so I skip this. The transformation problem, I don't go into that. I just say that in my argument there can't be a transformation problem, because if all the new value added is just living labor in monetary terms, I never named price rules. Whatever the price rule, what it can do is just to change the allocation. Nothing else. So the point is not a problem to understand what happens with different price rules and what they hide. Actually, it is the same view about Graziani, the same view that Graziani held. In a paper of '83, the title was "Let's Rehabilitate Marx's Theory of Value." He says, in fact, Marx's theory of value has nothing to say directly about the phenomenal prices. There is no probabilization to analyzing it. Analysis of the relations between the classes, or social macroeconomic analysis on the one hand, the one on which I focused my argument, and on the other side, the analysis of the relations within a class, or competitive microeconomic analysis on the other, are disparate phenomena that for that reasons are governed each by its own logic. I skipped a very provocative statement in which he says this has been explained over and over again in different models, but Barras as Raffa is more or less the same. Going deeper, there is something that you can read, and this is the Facebook page I have with Giovanna Vertua.